Welcome to Lower the Bar with John and Joe. Remember to breathe. This is your Power Hour. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are glad you joined us today. And how are you, Joe?
I'm good. I've been better, but I'm good.
Oh,
There's just a lot of things going on, and I think that's why we chose this week to talk about the topic. But before we tell them the topic, how was your week?
it was good. Had clients and worked, but like you said, a lot, not so much with me personally,
Right.
but a lot of friends, people I know, people I work with. Everyone seems to be having
Serious
Ye-
death
yes,
issues.
trauma, death.
Yes.
So
Illness.
yes, so we're actually going to talk about that today.
Yeah, I think we have to.
I think it's important. I know it's a subject that most of us don't really want to talk about. We tend to sweep that under the rug.
Which is amazing because none of us are getting out alive.
Well, yes. Death and taxes,
Only our energy.
yes.
Only our
yes. So,
energy.
I mean, we do know that and it's inevitable, but we live our lives, so to speak, in the now, and a lot of times because of where we are and the world we live in, we're very insulated, distracted. There are a lot of things that take us away from really getting in touch with that. But I think it's important that we talk about today.
I do too, because we've been working with clients recently who are dealing with issues of death and dying of family members, and every one of them looks at it differently. But after we talk to them, they seem to have an easier journey with the inevitable.
Yes. I mean, this is a very sort of broad palette, but this swath that you're painting here, because using the metaphor, we all grieve differently. How they say everyone grieves differently. It's absolutely true because we're all individuals. We all have our makeup, who we are, and it impacts us differently. But I think the more we talk about it, maybe that becomes a little bit easier. Not for everyone, but for some to begin to share, talk about it, and really understand what's happening.
Well, I think once you develop an awareness of why you're feeling the way you're feeling when a loved one has been told they're going to die soon, or maybe they've just died, we don't think about, why am I so sad? And if you ask someone, well, you don't ask it, but they often say, oh, he doesn't need to go now, he's got so much to do. But usually it's that we're going to miss them, and that's why we're so sad. We're really sad because we're going to miss them. Depends on your belief system. What do you believe as far as death goes? Are you afraid of death?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, I don't want to say I embrace it because I have so much more of my life to live, but I am looking forward to that day when I transition and I ascend to the light. I've already been on the other side. I've seen it. And my experience of it was so beautiful. And again, relating to the story of never really receiving it as a child, never hearing love from my family, and the kind of the abuse and all the isolation and everything. When I crossed over, when I had my near-death experience.
Have we ever talked about that?
Not really, but
Do you think?
the feeling of love, Joe.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Unconditional. it's strange because it's not the kind of love you feel in 3D, like in this life, in this body. It was very different. I mean, now integrating who I am and kind of what happened to me and the awarenesses now and the access to information that I have now, I can speak only for myself personally, but it's a different kind of energy. It's something you really don't experience here that often. I actually have a few times. And what's really interesting, Joe, is the few times I did, I was working with clients that were on the spectrum, that had either Asperger's or they had autism or dementia. And there were certain times when I was working with them that I had this connection. Something happened to me and I felt that love. They were in very brief spurts. Maybe one was 30 seconds, the other was literally like 15 seconds, 12, 15 seconds. It was brief.
But I understand that because I've had the same thing working with clients that had Asperger's, which is on the spectrum. That moment, you just know when you're linking eyes, it's just unconditional love.
Yeah, there's a certain, you can't,
it's a feeling.
I'm trying to articulate to our listeners, and you can't. It's totally experiential. It's completely something that you have to feel yourself. And I can tell everyone that when it's your time and you're ready to transition, you don't need to be afraid. You will feel this unconditional love coming over you. You might be right before it happens, but as you're transitioning, you are going to feel this unbelievable relief, love. I can't even tell you. It just, again, everyone has to experience it, but being that I've gone through it, that's kind of where it resonates for me now, because I can, I know what it feels like. So in that sense, I've already experienced it, because something you don't know what you don't know, there might be fear involved, anxiety, that we do a lot to ourselves, right? So now that I've experienced, I don't have that anxiety anymore. I just don't want it to be painful. And if it is, it is. It's
that's the way I feel.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing I can do about that, but my grandfather passed away in his sleep. My father's father just went to bed and never woke up.
That's what I want to do.
I think most people would really want to be able to go that way. That's beautiful for you. I don't mean you personally, I mean for the person to be able to experience that, but there's also a beauty in dying with your family around you, or in the arms of a loved one, or having that experience to be able to share that connection and to love and to let them know that you love them. And so there are many experiences in death that we get to experience. And I think karmically, so to speak, whatever you carry, I think if your life was really difficult and you have a lot of rage and anger, the likelihood that you're going to die in a sort of, I don't want to say violent way, but in a way that you live your life or you've expressed yourself in your life is probably how it's going to end for you. So that's maybe an awareness that we can bring to our listeners, that it's all about where you live, where you vibrate, where you're...
And to work through that.
Yes.
So that you don't have those feelings.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because there are times I look, just for shits and grins, like at astrology, just for the week or those kinds of narratives, and I look at my birth chart and whatever, and I go, oh, I'm not that person anymore. I've done the work. So just because, let's say you have a certain personality trait in your chart, or however you may think or perceive yourself, it has nothing to do with the inner work that you can do to change. If you find that sort of narrative negative in your life, like you have lack or you're lazy, or there's certain traits that everyone has depending upon your chart that are accentuated or triggered. So just because that's true, you can change it. Just like you work at Arby's, that doesn't define who you are. I want to let everybody know that it doesn't matter what job you're doing. I don't want you guys to really think about like, well, I'm only working in a fast food restaurant or a gas station, or it has nothing to do with what you are doing for work. It has everything to do with who you are.
And what you're doing for you.
Yes, exactly. So let's get back to death and really what that means for you, Joe. You've had a lot of death in your family.
I have.
Brothers, sisters, not
Mother,
just
father, brothers
not,
and sisters.
well, yeah, not just your parents. I meant,
But
most
I was with my parents when they died.
best friends. There's so many narratives here. So,
But being with them is different.
well, I think so.
Being with my mom was different.
As opposed to your father, you mean?
Yeah, well, I think my father his heart was still beating, but he wasn't able to respond.
Was he brain dead?
They hadn't ruled that. So I was just holding his hand and I said, maybe I should go call the nurses because he was starting to get cold. And he was old, he was 98. And they came in and they said, yeah, he's gone. But when they're 98 and they're sick, they just, they don't do some of the things they do when they're younger. And that was fine. He had a very peaceful death. But my mom died of COPD. And it just so happened that I lent my phone and my car to a neighbor. Once in my life, when I needed my phone to tell the family to come, I didn't. Couldn't.
Oh, interesting. That was not an accident.
No. It's hard to talk about.
No, but that's
Yeah.
important.
So I was with her,
For our
and it was
listeners as
very
well.
important for me to be with her. And it was really cool that I was alone with her.
Well, again, all
Because we
intentional.
were very close. And I watched her lose her ability to breathe. And I thought, most people would be going out of their mind, panicked. And I didn't. I just waited for the angels to come.
Oh,
And finally she smiled and she was gone.
oh.
It was beautiful. It was a privilege. And I grieved because I missed her. Because that's usually why we grieve. Oh, thank you. Because we miss her. But I was so happy that she was no longer. I mean, she smoked till she was 65. And then she read an article and she said, hey, smoking's bad for you. We got to stop. And she never smoked again. And she lived till she was, I think she was 90.
That's beautiful.
And she had COPD, but it was only really bad the last few years. So grieving. How do we grieve?
Well, wait, I don't mean to interrupt you,
Okay.
but obviously there's still emotions attached to the event because
because it was such a
your
privilege.
tears and but I think that's something to express and share with our listeners, kind of what came up for you, because as we, Joe, you and I, open up about our emotions, our feelings, our life experiences, maybe we can shed light and lead by example, so to speak, as a way for others to give themselves some kind of template, some kind of structure to navigate this very traumatic experience in our lives.
Okay.
Talk about cell memory.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, my
Definitely.
gosh, those experiences.
I have never been afraid of death and especially now, because of what you and I and my husband, what we all do, and believing that energy never leaves you, energy continues throughout your life, or through your, not just your human life, but it continues forever. So I've never been afraid of death. And I don't think about how much everybody's going to miss me when I'm gone. I mean, that's, to me, I wouldn't spend my time doing that. But when I think about how the most important thing I think people can do to prepare for the death of someone they love is think about how they feel about death. Because there are so many people that don't believe in life after death. That must be scary when you lose someone you love and you don't know where they are. You don't know what they're doing anyway when they become energy. I could never be buried. I don't want my body in the ground. So I'm going to be cremated.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this the other day. I think I'm going to choose the same way to be cremated. My father is. I think my mother is as well.
To me, putting someone in the ground, me personally, is almost celebrating their human life. And to me, that's only one form of life that you allow.
Yes.
So I just don't see
Very
the
well
point of
put.
it. Yeah.
I was afraid of death when I was young. I was
Probably
definitely
we all are when
fearful.
we're really little.
No, I don't mean when I was little. I mean
When you're a teenager?
No, older than that, like in my early 20s. It wasn't something that gave me a lot of anxiety. It's not something I thought about all the time. But if you were to ask me, I'd be like, well, I'm a little scared. And not because I didn't think there was an afterlife. The experience of it. But now...
And you don't want to do it. You got too much living.
Yeah, but now in my life, I don't look at it through that lens anymore. I feel like I'm okay with it. I am okay with it.
But I'm not going to do it now.
No, you've got a long life to go. So, but let's talk about how people grieve and what they
let me
do.
finish my thought.
Okay.
I think it's
sorry.
very important that people think about, what do I believe? When my loved one passes away, prepare for it. I mean, let's get right down to brass tacks. If you're a husband or a wife or a partner, doesn't matter whether you're married or not, prepare for it. Make sure that whatever paperwork you're going to need when the opposite person passes is prepared. Because when they pass, you're not going to be thinking straight.
Oh.
You're going to be doing a lot of crying.
It's really interesting that you said that, because I was out with a friend this week, and we met someone. There were some friends, and we were talking, and this friend was talking about how she was involved in a relationship with this person, and they got involved, and then they died, and they got married, obviously, and all the legal issues and all these tax problems and issues with the government and other legal responsibilities he had never told her about. And she was stuck with all of the debt and, I mean, everything. And she was so devastated, not by his death, but the memory of how, and it wasn't, I don't think it was intentional, because I think he resonated in fear and was so afraid to tell her, but it impacted her in such a way that it tainted everything.
Oh my God, she had to be full of anger.
Oh, she was. She was angry, resentful,
Yes.
bitter, because it really totally screwed her life up and her 3 children.
Okay, but it takes 2 to do that preparation.
No,
But I'm just putting that out there.
but I'm agreeing with you in the sense of we need to talk about death.
Yes.
In a way. And what happens when we go. Most people don't even have wills. You know, there's so many functioning types of protocols and structures that we really should pay attention to, because we don't think of the consequence if we don't.
Well,
Because we're dying and we're dead. Like, you know, but the person that's still alive is stuck with all of that legal work, all of that emotional responsibility, and it's very tough. So
especially if you need money to pay bills, and
That's what I'm saying.
certain accounts only have his or her name on it,
Oh,
so
yeah.
you can't access the money.
Exactly.
And yeah, I can see where you would get angrier, and then you mix that anger with grief, and boy, that just really dampens the love.
No, it doesn't. Well, yes, that's exponential, but it could really put you on a trajectory for the rest of your life that is really not healthy. So,
right.
yes,
We'll
but
go there in a minute.
I want to pose something to our listeners now. If if you are one of those people that this has happened to, it will help you to look at the lens, why did this happen to me? If you take ownership of why did this happen and what did I need to learn, because if that's happened to you in your life, there are other areas of your life that are lacking, that have lack that you haven't addressed. So this has come up in a way for you to look at it. So it will help to say, why did this happen to me? Because when you do that, you don't play the victim. You know, you don't put the responsibility outside yourself. You look at it, go, what's my lesson? What do I need to learn? So that's helpful for people who want to know, or our listeners, about that.
And I can really see somebody being very angry. There's so many women, and mostly women,
Yes.
that don't really know all the business about what they own, what the paperwork that they need to know, where it is. And when your husband passes away or your partner in a business passes away, if you don't know where that is,
Yes.
and it hasn't been, even your checking account, savings account, everything should have someone else's name on it.
Well, what's interesting is, you know, the point, I guess, of this is to open up channels of communication with your loved one, with your relationships.
Talk about it, even though you don't want to face death.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
The more transparent you are, the more you're sort of covering yourself in a sense. You're protecting yourself. Transparency leads to, you know, open communication, and there's no gray area. It's when there's gray area that things become very convoluted and ugly, and, you know, so don't do that to yourself. You know, that's really the point here.
I've had so many clients that come into me after a partner usually it's the husband, has died, and they spent years finding out things that they had no idea.
Well, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, they're angry. But the part that really gets me is they don't want their family to know because they're embarrassed that they didn't ever address it or question it.
Well, again,
And then it goes
yeah.
inside, causing what they came in for. Oh, I have fibromyalgia. I was just diagnosed a couple of years ago when my husband died. And it's really emotions are
Transference.
causing,
it's transference.
keeping all that emotion in causes physical and psychological
Well,
damage.
not only for the person that is survived, but a lot of times that stress, that anxiety in our life triggers our markers to create
Yes.
disease. So that also too can contribute. Let me just put this out to the ether. Anything that we suppress is never suppressed. It lives in our subconscious and finds ways to sabotage the body, the spirit, the soul. Because
I was going to say it's like part of our lower self. I mean, sometime we have to
Yes.
do a podcast on your lower self and your higher
yeah,
self.
kind of the way Matt Kahn talks about big I am, little I am.
Yes.
Uppercase, lowercase I am.
Yes.
And that's true, because the lowercase I am is about ego and sort of your everyday presence, where the big I am is the connection to spirit, mastery, you know, that living in unbiased benevolence for yourself, others, and all that. So it's important that we really understand what we do to ourselves. And as we're talking about this, I'm really beginning to feel and understand that this cycle of life, of our life, everything is intertwined, Joe. Nothing
is.
is separate. Every part
Absolutely.
of our life is so,
Entanglement.
yes, speaking of,
Yeah.
everything is entangled. Everything is related to another. Nothing happens for, just randomness. There's
Right.
always some kind of energy behind it that speaks to why it's happening in your life. Because that's what happens. We're presented with issues, good, bad, and ugly, that we're always meant to work through. And here's another thing. I talk about negative feelings or traumas, cell memories that we talk about, but positive traumas, so to speak, positive experiences are also really important, because I'm going to personalize this. For not now, but most of my life, I didn't know how to receive love. So even experiencing beautiful things, I never really could connect to, because I couldn't identify with what that spark was in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
It was always numb. I never felt it.
Well, how did you begin to feel it?
I met someone not too long ago that triggered something in me, because I had done all the inner work. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. We never finished with the inner work, but I worked a lot on myself,
Yeah.
and I healed my family, which was huge, my mother and father, which was a part of my mission. I knew that I had to do that, because there was a lot of dysfunction and real heavy-duty trauma in my family. Death, rape, those kinds of things, not just with me. So understanding that was also a part of my lesson. It's not just about negative things. Sometimes we have a hard time, and I know a lot of people who have a hard time. A lot of my clients have a hard time taking in compliments or feeling thing. It's one thing to have something happen and, oh, that's great, and I feel great, but it's another to really integrate that part of your heart, to open up, to receive love, and to really truly understand what that means.
What would you say to somebody who is still grieving 3 years, 4 years? I mean, grieving to the point where they really are having a hard time. They're going on with their life, but they're constantly thinking about what could have been.
One word: forgiveness.
Of,
Themselves.
for,
Expectations that were never met. They need to forgive themselves. You need to, at that moment, because that's the shadow side of ourselves. That's where it goes.
the lower self.
So again, we call that the flashlight effect. When that happens, because you're suddenly out of the dark and you're sort of in this exposed state, and you feel very vulnerable. It's a very awkward place. So we just need to have patience and forgiveness and benevolence for ourselves in that place. And when we can begin to do that, we can begin to forgive. Because all those feelings of why you're holding on to it are, I hate to say this, people, but they're self-serving. If you're still grieving 3 or 4 years later, it's serving something else for you. Now, we've talked about this very often, Joe. Perception is reality, and how you change behavior is identifying and then changing your response. Because again,
changing
there's that death. Your mother died, or whoever, your husband or your wife, and we don't want you to forget. You never forget.
Of course
but if
not.
you change your response to the trigger, you change your reality.
Absolutely.
And you can navigate your life in a way that brings you what you need. You don't have to suffer.
And I've had lots of clients come into hypnosis for grief therapy. And when you work with the subconscious, it is amazing how it just changes your perspective. And that's exactly what it is. You never forget all those things that could have been, that would have been, but they aren't. So you need to change your response to the trigger of someone's death.
I can personalize that. I didn't have a relationship with my mother, basically my whole life until recently. And
And how old is she?
94.
And now you're
or my father too, who's 100 this summer. Anyway, I became very close with my aunt, who looks just like my father, and I look like her. I actually look more like my aunt than I do my mother. But she was dying. She passed away about 7 years at 94, which is funny now that I'm talking about it. My mother's 94. But she and I got very close. And I also helped her with a lot of her issues at the end of her life. I don't know, people know, after my uncle died, she discovered, I talked about this in an early podcast, but she discovered herself and wanted to discover the world, and traveled with this psychic medium and his wife, Calvin was his name, and Mary was his wife, and traveled to, Brazil, and met shaman priests, and traveled to India and picked up, healers and brought them back to this country. And so we became...
change at that age. That's amazing.
I know, it's really quite remarkable, but in my life, in my timeline, in my story, it makes perfect sense kind of how it all came together for me. But we got very close, and she basically became my surrogate mother in a sense, but took over all of those maternal energies that I needed so desperately: the validation, the love, the attention, the benevolence, the kindness. And when she passed, I was pretty devastated. It impacted me really hard. But getting back to what we're talking about, coming full circle, I was able to identify what triggered me. And it wasn't
what
her...
you were feeling
Yes.
was your loss.
Right, but it
not
wasn't
that-
her death. It was the lack of relationship with my real mother
Of
that
course.
was continuing the pain.
Yes.
That I kept
Yes.
feeling that. And once I could identify that, I was able to let go of it. And it actually helped me work with my mother.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was pretty remarkable. So,
A lot of things to look at when
Yes.
you're grieving.
yes.
lot.
And actually, we'll probably cover this for a number of podcasts because our time is up today, and there's so much more to
Oh,
share.
there is. There is.
And we...
And I think next week I will be able to give you, if you need some reading material, there's some great books on grieving. Great books. And I'll recommend them next week in our next podcast. So stay tuned, and thank you for joining us this week.
Yeah, we are always so happy that you have chosen to join us, and we are privileged for your time. And we want to thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Coming from my back porch.
Yes. All right, so
Have a
everybody
great week.
have a great weekend, have a great week, and we love you.